Okay, so I had said that I was going to do a commentary on the ridiculous new phenomenon that is blaming the death of disco on white supremacy. Yes, this is a real thing that the woke contingent have seized upon. So, one of my favorite podcasts right now is called the Musical Splaining Podcast, starring Lindsay Ellis and a friend of hers. I am a musical theater geek from way back, as is Lindsay Ellis, so I can very much relate to this podcast. And what they do is every week, or in every episode rather, they take a different musical and they watch it either live or on video and they discuss it. And Lindsay Ellis loves musical theater. Her friend does not like musicals at all. And so she tries to explain to him why it's a good musical or why it's culturally relevant or what's popular about it, what have you. And he reacts to that, gives his thoughts and all that. It's actually a really good, really engaging podcast, and I really enjoy it. And it's been kind of the number one thing that I've had on in the background when I'm working editing in the studio and that kind of thing. So it's a good podcast 95% of the time, and the other 5% of the time they will say things that are so insufferably woke, it is just agonizing. Like my optic nerves are damaged by the amount of eye rolling I find myself doing. And it's just so ridiculous. Like, for example, there's an episode where they do an episode on Phantom of the Opera. They went to see Phantom of the Opera performed live. And the performance that they saw of Phantom of the Opera had the role of Carlotta, who is the pompous, insufferable diva bitch character in Phantom. They had that character played by a black woman. And so Lindsay Ellis and company come back from seeing that, and they have to talk about how problematic that was, because now you have because of the casting, you've created a problematic situation where white male characters are reacting badly to and being and being cruel in different ways to this black woman, and it looks very bad and it's problematic and all that. And it's just like you hear stuff like that and you're like, can you turn it off? Can you just turn it off? I mean, because at that point it just starts to sound pathological. And it's funny because I actually recently got done reading Woke Racism by John McWhorter. I highly recommend this book. This gave me so much. I did a video earlier called Wokeness and My Depression on how this movement has affected me personally. This book gave me so much perspective and it gave me so much hope. I highly recommend it. But he's right that this really is religious thinking after a point. Especially the kind of the religiosity or the religious certainty ingrained in this perspective that says, once we have offered the official woke opinion, this is the only perspective that can be had. The only valid perspective on this art is what we ascribe to it. That attitude. Anyway, so one of the more insufferably woke things I encountered, I was listening to it last night and I just had to stop, was they started pushing this thing. They were doing an episode on Xanadu, which is a movie that was meant to celebrate the disco era, but it ended up coming out maybe 2 years or so after disco had really died off, and as a result, it didn't do very well. They point out that, and I agree, that it probably would have done a lot better if it had come out a few years earlier, but it is a disco roller skating musical. It is every bit as silly and campy and carefree as it sounds. I enjoyed it. It's got a great soundtrack. It's a lot of fun, and I recommend it. Also, it's got animation by Don Bluth, who's my favorite animator. So they're talking about it, and and they're talking, like I said, about how it would have done better if it had come out during the disco era. And then they put a turd in the punch bowl, and they start talking about how they think that there's this emergent strain of cultural criticism that argues that disco was killed off by white supremacy. No kidding. They argue, they claim that disco music, the sudden demise of disco music was the result of white people feeling threatened by the gay black disco culture becoming mainstream and wanting to reassert dominance and white supremacist dominance and everything. This is complete horse shit propagated by people with studies in their college degrees who have wired themselves to interpret everything that comes down the pipe in these terms. Okay, so I'm going to get into why this is ridiculous. Why this is utterly ridiculous. Okay, so here's how the claim goes. The claim goes that there was this thing called, and this is true, there was an event in Chicago at White Sox Stadium called Disco Demolition Night, where some 50,000 disco records were burned on the field. It caused extraordinary damage to the field and ended up being a major hassle. But anyway, it was carried out by a local record DJ, a local radio DJ, who was irritated and put out with by the fact that his radio station had gone from playing rock and AOR records to playing exclusively disco, and he was sick of it. He complained about it extensively on air, and as a publicity stunt, he organized Disco Demolition Night. Now, I have mixed feelings about Disco Demolition Night. On the one hand, I really do think it was intended as a publicity stunt, as a ridiculous gimmick, and just as a way for people who were sick to death of hearing disco music to vent their frustration. But at the same time, I also think that burning artworks, burning any kind of works of art, like burning books and that sort of thing, has a very, very negative connotation to it in general, irrespective of what's being destroyed. So I don't like that. I don't like mass demonstrations where media is being destroyed, and I understand why that has ominous connotations to people, because it has ominous connotations to me. That said, I do not believe that it was an act of racism or homophobia or anything like that. And I will say, getting on an additional soapbox, I really do have a problem with how they've taken the term white supremacy. People have taken the term white supremacy and reappropriated it, not just to mean like previously white supremacy had referred to an attitude where white people are being held in higher regard than other races. That was all it meant. Now it refers to it's been used as this catch-all term to encompass all concepts of racism, sexism, homophobia, xenophobia, all things encompassed in this term white supremacy, to the point that now whiteness is synonymous with evil on a sociological level. People try to push this where they say, oh, we don't hate white people, we just hate white supremacy, or we hate whiteness and that sort of thing. Okay, think about, there are people out there who will tell you that they are not anti-Semitic, they just hate Zionism, or things like that. Now, things of that nature. Now, is there when people say things like that, is there any doubt in your mind that they actually hate literal Jewish people? No, of course not. It's obvious that they're just saving a step. They're just sugarcoating, or they're just adding a step to their bigotry. They're just sugarcoating what they actually mean. They're dog whistling. We know that, and it's no different here. There's no reason to think it's anything different here. So that's what's going on there. And so let's look now at disco music, how it evolved, what happened, what actually happened historically. Okay, so the first thing you need to understand is that the contention that has existed between hard rockers and pop music enthusiasts has always existed in some form throughout the history of the American popular song. Look at, for example, most notably, the dichotomy between the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. The Beatles come out, and they are making fun, squeaky clean pop music that makes the girls go gaga, right? And then the Rolling Stones emerge, and they were marketed initially as being the anti-Beatles. So where the Beatles are making fun, carefree, childlike pop music, and obviously the Beatles became serious artists in the latter half of their career, but early on they were a boy band essentially. They come along, they're basically a boy band, and so the response to that is that the Rolling Stones come out and they're marketed as the anti-Beatles. They are marketed as the hard-edged, hard-drinking, hard-smoking, descended testicles and chest hair, tons of chest hair, machismo answer to the squeaky clean, family-friendly Beatles. And so while the Beatles are singing "She Loves You," yeah, 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 the Rolling Stones are singing "I Can't Get No Satisfaction." So that harder edge versus the squeaky clean pop stuff has always existed. When I was in high school in the late '90s, there was all of this. There was all of this kind of. It was almost like a crosstown rivalry kind of thing. Like when you have your rival high school and everything, there was that same kind of faux sense of contention between the fans of nu metal and the fans of the kind of reemergence of the fans of the artists that were like the reemergence of the teen pop thing of boy bands and pop divas and stuff like that. So NSYNC and Britney Spears and all that stuff versus the fans of Korn and Limp Bizkit and all of that stuff. So this has existed and it continues to exist in some form. You can go all the way back to the jazz age and look at, swing jazz was the squeaky clean pop music, although given the ethnic realities of the genre, it was still, all jazz was still held in suspicion by a lot of white America. But within the genre, there is still this dichotomy where you've got the fun, upbeat swing music and the deep, hard, brooding, hard bop movement and everything like that. This is so ubiquitous to how marketing is done that it even famously has occurred in video game marketing. Think about Super Mario, the squeaky clean, family-friendly, child-friendly character, and how does Sega attack that? They bring out Sonic the Hedgehog, who has all of the attitude and all of the attitude, and he's a total badass, and you get this vibe like he's just got two middle fingers in the air the whole time. Now, metaphorically. Now, of course, obviously, in reality, there's nothing in Sonic the Hedgehog that's really objectionable on a family-friendly level, but nevertheless, Sonic is marketed as having that attitude of being the badass young upstart challenging the pop culture establishment. It goes on and on and on, and it has existed. So that dichotomy has always been there, and it's always existed. So that's part one. The next thing one thing to think about as we bring it back around to the discussion of Disco Demolition Night, The Guardian has an article talking about how the Guardian has an article that's the headline is something like "The Night They Tried to Kill Black Music" or something like that. Okay, that's an absolute lie. Disco Demolition Night was not targeting black music. Disco was not a singularly black art form. It was a very, very culturally diverse, racially diverse, sexually diverse, and art form that had extremely popular white artists, extremely popular female, gay artists all across the board. In fact, two of the biggest names in the genre, the Bee Gees and Casey and the Sunshine Band, white artists. Anyway, so this was not unlike jazz and early rock and roll. Disco was never an emergent, a black-dominated art form. It was always diverse. So within the article itself, they interview a man who was an usher and a ticket taker at the White Sox Stadium the night that Disco Demolition Night occurred. And he noticed that there were records coming in, there were albums coming in that were, or people were bringing in albums that were not disco records, but they were by other black artists. And he noticed this, and he reported it to his manager, and the manager just told him if they brought a record, let them in. And so this is it's kind of implied in the article that this was like that the manager was, that the manager like knew that this was some sort of racist thing that was some sort of racist intimidation campaign that was about to occur, and he was allowing it to happen. It's like, no, frankly, I think that sounds like horse shit. I would imagine what actually happened was the manager's actual response was like, look, we got 50,000 people coming in tonight. If they have a record, let them in. We're not going to sit there and parse through which record is disco and which one isn't. Just let them in. We're not going to slow things down. That seems, just Occam's razor makes that seem more like the more likely outcome, or the more likely reality of the situation. So anyway, the next thing to remember, that to put down the idea that disco was, died as the result of some kind of white supremacist intimidation campaign, is because, as far as I know, and I say this because maybe I did miss something, as far as I know, there were no vigilante hate crimes carried out in the name of anti-disco sentiment. It was not like, say, like the lynchings of the Jim Crow South or anything like that. Usually, when there's widespread sentiment like that, there's widespread bigoted hate sentiment like that, you see people start to take the law into their own hands. They start to become vigilantes. So, if there was like a movement of, leather jacket and spiked glove, punks and metalheads, grabbing people as they were leaving discos and beating the shit out of them, then you might have justification that there was an emergent hate movement. But really, all that article could offer was just that that after Disco Demolition Night, disco artists saw a rapid decline in their record sales, and Prince was booed off the stage when he opened for the Rolling Stones, which I can't really feel too bad about. While I certainly sympathize with him, I can't feel too bad about that, considering that he went on to have one of the best-selling and most critically and commercially successful recording careers of any artist in history. But anyway, your record sales dropping is not a hate crime. People not liking your music is not a hate crime. But we did not see, as far as I know, there were no actual anti-disco hate crimes being carried out. So that alone puts lie to the idea that this was some kind of organized hate movement, or it was in any way, shape, or form white America trying to push back against white America trying to push back against something that they saw as culturally invasive. Now, the other thing that you would have to ask is, if this was white America pushing back against something they saw as culturally invasive, why were they not destroying the records of Elton John? Why were they not destroying the records of David Bowie? These as two examples of, dare we say, sexually diverse artists that certainly were not being targeted by the same demographic that was anti-disco, the disco sucks movement, as they started to call it. Now, don't get me wrong, those artists were targeted by, the Pat Robertsons and Jerry Falwells of the world, but that's not being targeted on the basis of, I would say to a certain extent, they are trying to maintain the PTLs and the 700 clubs of the world and all that. They were marketing to white middle America and trying to scare them with that there was a lunatic fringe devouring things on the outside. They were trying to market that way, but they were doing that on the basis of puritanical religious fervor. And again, their views, it's that's such a I'm gonna like not. There's more that I want to talk about. I acknowledge that assholes like the Pat Robertsons and the Jerry Falwells of the world were trying to put a clamp on people's good times. I don't want to get way off in the weeds about that though. Anyway, so the but bringing it back around to disco, the next main point I want to make though is I want something to be there's something needs to be understood about what disco was and why it was popular. Disco was dance music. And here's the thing. Popular music, pop music, what we call pop music, is dance music. It has its cultural origins it has its cultural origins in dance halls and music designed to get people dancing, and it moves it moves from one style to the next based on the popularity of the dances that are being done with it. You can even, and that goes all the way back to ragtime. You can even look at American Bandstand and that sort of thing. You can even see in early rock and roll music where there would be songs built around new dance styles, like Ray Charles doing the Mess Around. And yes, I know that the lyrics were fed to him on the spot in the studio, but even so, that's culturally where that comes from, is introducing new styles of dance and new styles of music to accommodate that style of dance, the newly emergent styles of dance. So, knowing that, and knowing that that is how pop music emerges, and really you could say that rock music and the distinction with what we call rock music or hard driving rock music and everything, that was the reaction to that made up the reactionary element to disco. It's really that emergent style really comes from a musical style that's not specifically geared towards dance. So really you can draw a divide between the people that want music they can dance to and people that want music they can sit and listen to or passively listen to. And that goes back, by the way, again to the swing era, where you've got swing jazz is the popular art form, the pop version of the art form, and then hard bop and bebop are the deep listener-oriented versions of the art form. That's really kind of where the cultural origin of this comes from in music. Anyway, so bringing it back around to disco, how did disco become popular? Disco became popular because of one very specific thing, an article that was written in New York Magazine following the adventures of a man named Vincent, who was a part of a newly emerging underground dance craze in New York City called disco. That article was very well written and seized upon the imaginations of people all over the country. The popularity of that article prompted filmmakers to option the article for a movie, which became Saturday Night Fever. Vincent became Tony Manero, John Travolta's magnum opus performance. Now, lest you think I am bashing on disco, understand that I love disco music. I like disco. I really do love disco music, just like I love most genres of music. And I think there are some absolutely brilliant artistic achievements within disco music, not the least of which is the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack. It is amazing. The Bee Gees are amazing. I love the Bee Gees. I love them unironically. They are really good, brilliant music. And also, I think Saturday Night Fever is one of the best movies ever made. If you have not seen it, oh my God, what's wrong with you? I went into it thinking it was going to be some, lighthearted dance feel-good movie like Dirty Dancing or Footloose or something like that. No, it is a hard New York City drama. It is stunning. John Travolta is an unparalleled badass in that movie. I don't care. I don't care about any of the nuttiness he went through with Scientology or how that affected his public image. When he is on screen in that movie, he is a stone cold motherfucker, and he is amazing. He dominates the screen. He dominates with his dancing. He dominates just with his eyes. You know, he's got the most amazing, arresting fucking eyes. I love his performance in that. It is rivaled only by his performance in Pulp Fiction. Also, his performance as Chili Palmer in Get Shorty, but that's a lesser known one. But anyway, John Travolta's amazing. It's an incredible movie, and understandably so. And that movie caught on big time. People loved Saturday Night Fever, and it was like, you know, Star Wars came out around the same time, in the same era, but Saturday Night Fever came out earlier, and Saturday Night Fever was the Star Wars of underground club movies. I mean, people just loved this movie. It was a huge cash cow, and the soundtrack became one of the best-selling soundtracks of all time. And so it became, it just, people were rushing and racing, record execs, movie makers, up and coming aspiring pop artists. Everybody wanted to get on the disco bandwagon and milk that sucker for all it was worth. And it became a overwhelmingly ubiquitous public phenomenon during this time, an unparalleled public phenomenon. And so, here's the thing, though. It was all based on a lie. The reality of that article that was written about disco music is that it was mostly fabricated. It really does come from the James Frey School of Journalism. And what happened with that article was it was heavily embellished, and the real Tony Manero was a guy named Vincent, who, despite being good on the dance floor, was actually a very shy, introverted wallflower, otherwise did not have any of the fascinating sexual exploits or other wild misadventures that Tony Manero enjoys in Saturday Night Fever. And so the disco scene, the popularity of the disco scene was largely exaggerated in that article. It was very much an underground New York club phenomenon with no real momentum to go anywhere else. It was popular in the gay nightclubs and a few other places, and that was about it. So the disco phenomenon was a Saturday Night Fever phenomenon. It was the result of people trying to cash in on the overwhelming, just mind-boggling level of success that this movie was enjoying. And what is central to Saturday Night Fever? The dancing, the music and the dancing, the disco dancing. So much of what we know about disco dancing, the staples of the performative staples of disco dancing as a dance art form, originated with Saturday Night Fever. And so that was what was the catalyst for the popularity of it. And again, pop music is built around dance crazes. And you know what happened in the early 1980s? Another movie came along. A movie called Breakin', followed by Breakin' 2 Electric Boogaloo. And it introduced a hot new dance craze called breakdancing. And that was suddenly the new dance craze, and the breakdancing craze had new music associated with it, and so dance music started going in other directions. Funk music came out. Funk, one of the greatest musical genres to emerge in popular music. Funk music came out. The early developments of what would become hip-hop and rap started coming out of that scene, out of the breakdancing scene and all of that. But Breakin', although it did not have the same financial success as Saturday Night Fever, Breakin' introduced the breakdancing phenomenon, and suddenly that was what everybody wanted to do. And so That combined with, yes, the disco sucks movement, because people were sick of disco. It had been milked like nothing else. It had just been this constant barrage of these artists trying to capitalize on Saturday Night Fever. And I'm not saying that there's not good. I'm not suggesting there wasn't good music. There was great music that came out of that. But it was a very artificial movement, predicated on a very artificially inflated phenomenon. And breakdancing came along, and breakdancing was far, far more organic. Breakdancing was something that actually was occurring among urban street culture. And yes, granted, by urban, I meant black right there. Okay, black street culture. It was very, very popular. It really caught on with the kids, and it emerged in a much, much more organic form than what happened with disco. And so, because of the organic origins of breakdancing, it really captivated people, and it really turned their focus, and it really caught on as a new and emergent thing. And from that, we got hip-hop music and rap, which have become extraordinarily dominant in the music industry, especially lately, to the point that, we so seldom see fresh new bands topping the charts anymore. Instead, I have to hear about the popularity of artists with names like Pooh Shiesty, which that's so unbelievably ridiculous. I shudder to think that that's even a real artist. But anyway, so that the hip hop movement caught on. That really came to dominate the dance music market more and more and more, to the point that it's now completely dominating it, the pop market. And so my question would be this to any of the imbeciles that are saying that are trying to argue that disco was killed by white supremacy. Why has that same white supposedly dominating white supremacist culture, why has it not toppled rap music? I mean, surely rap music has been far, far more, rap music has had now about 40 years worth of staying power, where disco had this tiny window of popularity in the late 70s. Why has this supposed white power structure that we're supposed to just, you're a blasphemer against humanity if you think that if you start to question whether or not this thing really exists to the extent that people are saying it does, why has this supposedly all-powerful, omniscient force not taken steps to topple rap music the way it did with disco music? That would be my rhetorical question. And it's a rhetorical question because the answer is obvious. This is bullshit. The disco was not killed by white supremacy. Disco was killed by extreme saturation of the market, combined with a change in musical trends as it related to dance music. That was it. And here's the final thing. The final nail in the coffin for disco is simply that people tends to be a certain, I'm sure there's a media theory expression for this, but there's a certain kind of immediate hindsight that people have about a craze. Like maybe 5 years after a craze takes off, people look back on it and think, wow, we were into that. That's kind of cringy. Just like talking about the nu metal craze. When I was a freshman, sophomore in high school, it was all about Limp Bizkit, and everybody had all of the guys were wearing those absolutely stupid looking pants where like each pant leg looks like a giant denim dress, or something, or a skirt or something like that. It's just these ridiculous looking pants, and everybody was doing the kind of insane clown posse white reinterpretation, cheesy white reinterpretation of black gangster culture and all of that stuff. That was like insanely popular then. By the time I was in college a few years later, everybody thought that was just cringy, as how the word cringe had not emerged in popular culture, but people just thought it was cringy as hell. It was just embarrassing. Nobody wanted. I remember a friend of mine. I when Facebook emerged while I was in college, I messaged a friend of mine, and as a guy that he was really into ICP, into Insane Clown Posse, when we were in high school. I messaged him about it while we were in college, and he said, I asked if he was still listening to ICP, just offhandedly, and he said, to be honest with you, I'm kind of embarrassed about that time in my life. I don't like to think about it. So it's that kind of thing starts to happen. Disco was obviously prone to that sort of thing, and the older it got and the older the listeners got, the more cringy it started to seem. And ironically, the thing that really and truly was the death nail in the coffin for the popularity of disco was another John Travolta movie, the sequel to Saturday Night Fever, called Stayin' Alive. And Stayin' Alive follows Tony Manero as he tries to transition from aimless nightclub dancing ne'er-do-well into serious actor and stage dancer, and that sort of thing. I enjoyed the movie. I liked it probably more than a lot of people did, but honestly, it does not hold a candle to Saturday Night Fever. And that movie flopped. It got extraordinarily bad reviews, and that was the end. That was the really and truly the end of the disco phenomenon. And you know what? All of those hard rockers that were mad about the squeaky clean pop stuff, that went off into the heavy metal genre. Those people all joined ranks in the newly emerging heavy metal genre, and pardon me, in the early 1980s, you know what was going on with that? There you had they weren't squeaky clean by any stretch of the imagination, but the softcore, easy listening Sunset Strip sound popularized by Motley Crue and Poison, and the more radio friendly pop oriented version of metal that was emerging, as well as the emerging thrash genre that was influenced by the underground new wave of British heavy metal movement. And the same dichotomy between easy listening pop and hardcore badassery, that same rivalry, that same dichotomy continued throughout the 80s in the heavy metal genre, which was unquestionably dominated by white artists. So can we, that being the case, knowing that there was clearly no racial animosity fueling that divide between music listeners, can we kindly and politely retire this utterly ridiculous notion that disco was killed by white supremacy? To review, disco was killed by oversaturation of the market, changing musical trends as is always the case, and the fact that the art form overstayed its welcome long enough that the people who were into it matured to the point that they started thinking that it was ridiculous. That's what happened. And to the people out there pushing this crap, the people with studies, the word studies in their college degrees, can you just stop? Like I said earlier, can you just switch it off? Can you just let people have fun? Stop making everything into an argument and just let people have a good time. I really, H.L. Mencken said that a Puritan is someone with the sinking feeling that somebody somewhere is having a good time. And that really is it. There's always whether it's religious puritanical people or it's secular puritanical people, there are always people out there that see people having fun and enjoying themselves, and they say, well, this just can't do. And honestly, if those people could just turn it off, could just stop, could stop trying to force everybody to see everything through their uptight, miserable, scornful lens, and just let people have fun. the world would be a much better place.